But I want to talk to you a little bit about what we learned last night on television, and it seems as though every time every week we have been doing a new show on Common Core, and Michelle Malkin is really the only one that I know of that has been leading the way on Common Core. She has been talking about this one for a while now, and nobody really has paid much attention because it's so hard to believe. But I will tell you, as I told the television audience last night, and this is really important if you are a long-term fan of the show, you'll remember when Stimulus came out, and I said they're building something. And I didn't know exactly what it was. That summer, if you remember, I was going through the stimulus package and the beginnings of the Tides Foundation and everything else that was going on. And I remember it clearly. I had found something in one of the packages, and Sarah Palin and I, this is a time when Sarah Palin and I were close, and Sarah and I were emailing back and forth, and I had just found something. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had just found something. I believe it was in the stimulus package, and it was on communications. And I had asked one of our researchers to look for a few pieces of information, and that night they came in, and they had been working on it for a couple of weeks, and it correlated, unbeknownst to me at the time when I asked for the research to be done, with what I was doing on research in the stimulus package. And I remember, I broke out in a cold sweat when I read this, because what I realized was this groundwork had been laid in pieces for a very long time. I realized what we were up against. I realized that we were not just up against the liberals, as everybody used to call them, and please don't call them, because liberal and conservative, they're not enemies. Big government progressives are enemies. Those are the enemies. Liberals are not. Democrats are not. Republicans are not. Conservatives are not. It's only when you add the big government progressive that a liberal becomes your enemy. It's only when you add the big government progressive that a conservative will become your enemy. Because then they have the power to dictate your life. And I remember seeing the pieces of a machine that had been laid out by George W. Bush, and then new pieces of the same machine introduced in the stimulus package. And I realized they were building something one piece at a time, and I couldn't figure out what they were building. But if you used to listen to this program back in 2008, 2009, I began to say, they are building a machine. I don't know what it is, but you do not want this machine to be turned on. It was when I first started to say, do not give them anything. Don't give them anything. Either side, don't give them any more, because they're building something. Last night, I found the machine, and it is truly terrifying. We'll get into it a little later on in the program, next hour, top of next hour. Please clear your schedule if you can and give me 30 minutes at the top of next hour. If you are somebody who is in the 912 Project, please call your friends and say, you've got to listen to Glenn at the top of next hour. This is an emergency SOS. And those who already get it will say, thank goodness the troops are coming. if the troops indeed do come. If you don't understand what Common Core is yet, please don't dismiss it. It is, out of everything that we've uncovered, out of everything that we have found, this is the most disturbing thing that we have found. And we've found some pretty awful things. Remember, we're the ones who found the communist in the White House. This is by far the most disturbing. Out of everything we've shown you on Cass Sunstein and everything else, bad, really bad.
Don't undersell it or anything, though.
Oh, yeah. And I want you to know that what I tell you, what I said last night, which was the third part in our series on what's happening in our elementary schools, last night was Common Core and data gathering. What I told you last night, what I showed you last night, and what I will share with you today on radio comes from the Department of Education. They can say that it's a conspiracy theory all they want, but I am only going to quote from the Department of Education and from the stimulus package. And I will put it together for you. This is real, and it is happening right now. And it is the kicking the door closed on capitalism, the free market system. And if you've ever thought and said, my kids are going to be slaves. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, they are, but not the way you think. I've always thought they were going to be slaves to debt. No. I am not an anti-corporate kind of guy. I don't think corporations are bad. But anyone you know that has ever uttered the words, yeah, well, global corporations are just running the world. Anybody you've ever said those words, if you've ever heard anybody say those words, most likely they were from a liberal. This is the point we can connect on. Because I'm telling you now, I have never said these words. Correct me if I'm wrong. Stu and Pat, you've been hearing my words for a long time. Tell me if you've ever heard me say, the United States government and these corporatists are getting in bed together and they're going to run the world and it's going to be a giant corporate state. We should just replace all of the stars with logos of corporations on our flag.
Yeah. No, that flag does exist and you've never flown it.
Let me tell you something. After you hear today, after you see what's happening in our schools, we should just replace the stars on our flag with logos of corporations. Really bad. Now I want to show you and spend a few minutes here on kind of a setup. And I touched on this last night. What was the name of that documentary? It was the documentary that the president made for his reelection. It was it called The Road We're Traveling? Right?
Yes.
Road We've Traveled, I think.
The Road We've Traveled. I don't know.
We'll figure it out.
But when I saw that, I said, oh my gosh, that's a book by Stuart Chase. That's a book, a very important book that nobody's ever heard of. And it's a book by the guy who coined the term the New Deal. Big, huge progressive. The Road We Are Traveling. And at the time we talked about it. At the time, I had one copy of this book. Now, I am a rare book collector. We have some incredible rare books. I mean, I was just given last week Edmund Burke's prayer Bible, given to him by King George. We have some pretty incredible stuff. I have the hand signed by FDR speech that he gave, December 7th, 1941. The infamy speech. So I can find stuff, and we can get them. This book is the only copy I have. It's a bad copy of it. This was a very popular, well-known book at the time. This is from 1946. So it's not real old. I have books from the 1300s. This is the only copy of this book that we can find, and we now have looked for 4 years. I got an update, and I said, we have got to get a copy of this book. Here's an update. If you are a rare book collector, this. If you can find it, it won't cost you a lot of money. It costs you $20. If you can find it, please alert us. Send it to us, and we will preserve it. This is extraordinarily important, and here's how I know. We went on the air with this about 3 years ago when we found it, and we bought one copy of it, but we didn't realize how important it was. Since that time, when we first went on the air with this on Fox, the copies are no longer available. Can't find it anywhere. Then what happened is after we went on the air with it, when the president made the documentary, and I went on it on Fox the second time with this book, now you can buy copies of this book. You can buy a copy of this book on Amazon.com, but when you read the comments, every copy that we have bought has the important pages torn out. And now it's getting so bad that people are taking this, tearing out certain pages, and putting in pages of other books in it. They are erasing this history because this absolutely tells the entire story of where we are. This book, the whole premise is where the road we're traveling. This is what we've designed. This is what it's going to look like in the end. I'm going to explain it to you. I'm going to give you the list of, I think, 18 items. I gave 8 of them last night on television. I believe all but 2 of them have been done. And when you understand the premise behind this book and what this book says we look like in the end, you're not going to like it. And when you tie this book from the 1940s into this beautiful handbook from the Department of Education and the stimulus package, you see the machine that they're building. And you've got about 12 months to turn this machine off in your state. I'm going to take a quick break, then we're going to come back. The Road We Are Traveling by Stuart Chase. Coming up in just a second. All right. Coming up at the bottom of the hour here, I'm going to explain System X, which is what Stuart Chase described where we were headed in the 1940s and where we have now arrived. System X, when you understand it, you will understand why I just said the corporations you might as well replace the stars of the flag with the logos of the corporations. I've never believed that. And I want to make sure I make this very, very clear. Not all corporations are bad. But once a corporation gets into bed with the government and uses the levers of the government to further its corporate interests and does it in a fashion that helps the government further its aspirations. Once you have a symbiotic relationship between the corporation and the state, you're in big trouble. I mean, it is a system. It's not communism. You'd call it statism now, but really, by definition, it's fascism. It's exactly what Germany put together. It's what made the difference between. It's why the fascists beat communism. When it was a race between the two of them, it's why the communists lost. Because the communists could not have, because they didn't have entrepreneurs, they didn't have private industry, they couldn't compete. But the reason why all the elites have always thought fascism was better, Mussolini was better, was because you had that private entrepreneur. but then you had it under state control. And so you'd still have the free market, but if it was under state control, not ownership, control, well, then the state could say, no, guys, you're building these instead of that. And so it could move much faster. And that's where we've moved, and not all corporations, and not the ones that you've always been led to believe are the evil corporations.
Not even most corporations. It's a select few. It's
that we know of right now, and it's and there's one that you know because you've seen it, and we've talked about it in the last 4 years. But there's another one that is a little surprising, I think, to most. And I'll be able to explain, what they're doing according to their own documents, according to the Department of Education and everything else. I'll only use original sources, and I will show it to you. And then you'll also understand at the end, you will understand why they would do it. Because I'm not saying that they're necessarily evil. I'm saying they are only looking out for their best interest, and they are colluding, and the combination of these two things is evil. We'll show you that, and I'll explain System X as the groundwork next. So let me tell you about the road we are traveling. Stuart Chase. If you can find this book someplace, please alert me. We have contacted the publisher. We tried to buy the rights to this book to republish it. We're not allowed to republish it. Somebody's keeping these rights alive, but they do not. This is not studied anywhere.
How do you know if you have one intact with the original pages? Because you said
I will give you the.
That some of the pages have been removed and pages from other books stuck in there. How do you know if you have the real ones?
I will go over that tonight. Maybe I think we have a copy where the pages have been replaced. Mm-hmm. So we'll look for that copy, and I'll try to give you some information on that. But really, one of the most important sections, really page 95 and 96, is really important, and it's part of business as usual. Now, remember, this is written right at the end of World War II. And it's saying, okay, now what are we going to come into? So it talks about a managerial revolution. A managerial revolution. Another book that is gone. And that's the topic of tonight's program, a managerial revolution. Basically what that means is technocrats run the world. Who's running Europe right now? Are they elected politicians?
No, I mean, you'd say the EU and the IMF.
And who's the guy running Italy? A technocrat. He was not elected, and nobody's saying anything. You have unelected technocrats running Europe, and nobody's saying anything. That's the managerial revolution that this book and a guy named James Burnham wrote about. And they're buried because they were honest, well read and well studied at the time. So the first part is managerial revolution, the first intelligent attempt to understand what is coming that I have seen, says this writer, Stuart Chase. Many more studies will be needed before the mystery is cleared up on what this exactly will look like and what we will call it. But we are going to lay out something called X, which is displacing the system of free enterprise all over the world. If we do not yet know what to call it, we can at least describe its major characteristics. And here is what is replacing free enterprise. And it says free enterprise into X. Tell me if any of this sounds familiar. A strong, centralized government. An executive arm growing at the expense of the legislative and judicial arms. In some countries, power is consolidated into a dictator issuing decrees. The control of banking, credit, and security exchanges by the government. Is that happening? The underwriting of employment by the government. So in other words, growing the federal worker list, either through armaments or public works. The underwriting of Social Security by the government, old age pensions, mother's pensions, unemployment insurance, and the like. The underwriting of food, housing, and medical care by the government. The United States is already experimenting with providing these essentials. Other nations are far down this road. The use of deficit spending techniques to finance these underwritings. The annually balanced budget has lost its old-timey feel. The abandonment of gold in favor of a managed currency. The control of foreign trade by the government with increasing emphasis on bilateral agreements. The control of natural resources and an increasing emphasis on self-sufficiency. The control of energy sources such as hydroelectric power, coal, petroleum, and natural gas. The control of transportation, railway, highway, airway, waterway. The control of agricultural production. The control of labor organizations. The enlistment of young men and young women in youth corps devoted to health, discipline, community service, and ideologies consistent with those of the authorities.
That's the first one that's debatable as to whether or not it's been achieved already. Everything else is already done. Everything else you've mentioned, we've already done. I don't know about the Youth Corps, and they just did. Wasn't it a FEMA Youth Corps we talked about?
Yeah.
Fairly recently?
Yeah.
So you could almost say that one is...
It's the FEMA Work Corps. It's the AmeriCorps. Remember, what was the program we just spoke about 2 weeks ago that was so frightening? And I said, hey, and who's behind that? Oh, AmeriCorps. Remember? What was that? Anybody remember? Try this one on. Heavy taxation with special emphasis on estates, meaning what you leave behind, your will, and incomes of the rich. Not much taking over of properties or industries in the old socialistic sense. But the formula of the future is control without ownership. It's interesting to recall the same formula is used by the management of great corporations in depriving stockholders of power. And finally, the state control of communications and propaganda. What do you say? The only thing that hasn't really been done is the youth. Now, let's go over just a couple of them. The strong central government, absolutely been done, and we're now getting to the point to where the states have no rights. And at the top of the hour, I'm going to tell you about Common Core. It is the end run around the state. It is the death knell to the state constitution and the state control of your children. It is also the death knell. When we talked last night to one guy who is a child psychiatrist and a psychologist, and his job is to get into the minds of children, and they do it by asking, I think, 44 questions. What you will see, I mean, this is one corporation and all of the items that they're going to be finding out about your children. How many pages is 50? All of the items, small print, all of the items that they're going to find out about your children. This guy said, and he thought I was a conspiracy theorist. This guy said, you have no idea the power of that information. You have no idea. He said, I asked 44 questions. He said, I have to be an ethical man because I could manipulate that family like crazy. He said, because I know everything. With 44 questions, I can pretty much know. I said, are we headed towards Minority Report? He said, Glenn, they are going to claim to know what your child is going to do. By the time they're 7, that child's life is going to be planned out, mapped out, and the future is locked into stone, and your child will never get out from underneath that, ever. It will follow him for the rest of his life. Stronger executive arm than the legislative. How many times did we say at the very beginning, Congress, you're making yourself irrelevant? The judiciary now is irrelevant. Look at what happened with John Roberts. I don't care to my dying day. I will never believe that was John Roberts' decision. I mean, it was his decision, but something happened. Something happened. Whether he decided that the best thing to do was, for the credibility of the courts, I'm going to come together. He wrote another decision.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't his viewpoint. Now, whether he came to that on his own because he had this stupid idea that we have to save the sanctity of the court and make sure that it wasn't a close call or whatever, I don't know. I don't know why he did it, or somebody came to him and pressured, but that was not what was actually in his heart. And so the judiciary is now a puppet of the executive branch. Government control of banking, credit, and security. This is what's happening right now. This is what's happening in Cyprus. This is what's happening with the Fed. Do you have control of your money? Do you actually still believe that you have control of your own money? I contend you don't. Who owns the title to your house if you don't? Who owns it?
The bank.
Which one? The one you took the loan from?
I think still, yeah. But it's only been not even a year yet.
Yeah, I bet you not. Go ask and see if you can see the title of your... I'll bet you not. It'll be sold over and over and over again. It's rehypothecation. Nobody knows who actually owns anything. And so you don't own your money. Your money is in the bank. People of Cyprus understand that now. They've just been taught. You don't own your money. We'll allow you to only take so much out. Remember, the idea of the progressives is, I don't begrudge a man a dollar as long as it's well earned and well spent. So as long as you're doing with it what they want you to do with it, you're fine. But you don't actually own your money. You don't own anything. And remember, time is money. If they take your money, they have taken your life. They have taken your time. Underwriting for food, housing, and medical. That's what's happened with the medical. That's what's happening with the housing because of hypothecation. You watch, you will be living in government housing. And food is just happening in a different route. Deficit spending, done. But youth and people dedicated to the government ideology, that is Common Core. I will show you what the corporations, two in particular, GE and Windows, Microsoft, what they are doing right now with Common Core and the information that they are collecting. Now, I find it interesting that NBC, the arm of this government, is what network? MSNBC. MSNBC was owned by what energy corporation? GE. What does the MS in MSNBC stand for? Microsoft. Now, neither GE nor Microsoft have anything to do with MSNBC anymore. But isn't it fascinating that GE and Microsoft got together, that now they were the ones who started the propaganda machine. And they're the ones that are now behind Common Core. And I will show you what they are doing, and I'll then give you exactly why these corporations, how this System X works, and what makes it so insidious, even though they will tell you, and they'll tell you, and you could strap them to a lie detector, they mean it. What? We're not doing anything wrong. This is good for everybody. And they mean it. They're not necessarily evil, but what they are building will be used for great and terrible evil.